Hi friends, and welcome. On today's adventure, we're going down to southeastern Kansas, and by we, I mean my pro staffer, camera guy, and good friend, Mr. Tom Dewey. And southeastern Kansas means we're going to B&C, Kansas to see our good friend Ed and Wendy Barton down there. And if you are a frequent flyer, well then you know we try to get down there whenever we can. We are up against a bit of a time window on this trip though. It's just 4 days until Thanksgiving, so we really have a short time to hunt. And when you couple that with the fact that the rut is starting to wind down, well, let's just say if we do get a chance at one of them big old Kansas bruisers, we better make good on it. Hey, I'm your host, Kyle Randall. This is my Wilderness Journal, and we're headed down the yellow brick road hoping on one more big buck right now. Well, Dorothy, yeah, it's just like Kansas. Despite the 20 to 30 mile an hour winds and the 50+ degree temperatures, we got out and set up. We were hunting a creek bottom that had a feeder in it, and Ed assured me there were some good deer working in this area, but so far, we hadn't seen much. We're back down here with Ed Barton, and I gotta tell you, it's good to have Tom back in the tree again. He was kind of taking it a little too easy, getting a little soft, but he's back out here with us. On the way in here, believe it or not, we jumped a beautiful 9-point buck that was bedded 20 yards from the stand. You just never know here, especially during the rut. We're gonna get quiet. Hopefully this wind lays down a little bit. But either way, I'm looking forward to the next 4 days. And later that afternoon, just about sunset, the wind did lay down some, and we did see a buck. Kind of. What appeared to be a young forked horn was working his way in toward the feeder, and we just sat there thinking, well, there might be another buck following him around. It's not likely during the rut, but you just never know. He worked his way in all the way to the feeder and then just stood there. Actually gave us the once over twice and then just stood there sniffing around and looking. He didn't even act like he was wanting to feed. I think he was just there looking for does. But for whatever reason, he hung around for a little bit and then turned around and went right back out the way he'd come. We closed out our first day just sitting there watching, but unfortunately, that was the only deer we saw that night. That first evening was warm and really windy. I'm not surprised we didn't see many deer up on their feet moving around. We did see that one little forked horn buck just before dark, but to tell you the truth, the way the wind had the tree swaying back and forth, I'm not real sure I could have taken a responsible shot at him had he been an older deer. Fortunately, the weather guessers were forecasting a cold front dropping through Kansas that night, so hopefully come the morning things would be a little better. And the following morning it was a lot cooler, and a little bit after sunrise we did see some deer moving. Another young buck, this one a one-antlered spike, was working his way in. And just like the buck the night before, he worked his way up to the feeder, stood there sniffing and looking around, and then without so much as a mouthful of feed, turned and kept right on going down the creek bed. At least the young guys were cruising looking for does, and sooner or later maybe a big one would show up, or maybe a doe would lead one past us. Either way, at least we were seeing some movement. And speaking of some movement, about 20 minutes later I heard Tom whisper, and a little button buck was working his way right up past our stand, right up underneath my ladder almost. That little guy passed and it got quiet again. That is, until Tom whispered and pointed. Only this time it was a possum. Tom seemed to be fascinated with these critters, and while I was watching the possum, I looked over. There was a deer. It was actually two deer. Two fawns, a button buck and a doe, were working their way in at us. They slowly picked their way in closer and closer, and then one of them laid down. Yeah, it bedded down right there out in front of us. And then a few seconds later, the other one did. Only he didn't stay bedded for long. He got back on his feet and started nosing around again. I was sitting there thinking, great. Two fawns at less than 20 feet is just exactly what we need. That way, if we was to see a deer we wanted to shoot at, we wouldn't dare move. And sooner or later, you had to know they were going to smell something. Fortunately, after only a half hour or so, they decided to get up and move off of their own accord. I was never so happy to see two deer leaving as I was those two.
The last thing we needed was those fawns bedded right there at 6 to 8 feet. Not what you want to have right in front of you. Still, I think your odor control's working. Either that or they like your new aftershave better.
Friends, the very last thing you want on an archery deer hunt is to have one, let alone two deer bed down right at the base of your tree, not 10 feet away. So to say I was pleased when they got up and moved off, well, that'd be a bit of an understatement. I wasn't too happy about the fact that the wind was starting to build again, but that's the way it is when you hunt in Kansas. If you don't want to be out in the wind, you probably shouldn't go there. And speaking of the wind, it was still bouncing us around pretty good that afternoon as we were watching another young buck working his way out toward the field pestering some does. And then another button buck came working its way into us. There were a few deer moving around, but we still hadn't seen anything of any age, no shooters to be certain. Well, that's the way it is on a late rut hunt. You hope to see some mature does and then hope that one of those does is the right doe to drag a buck across in front of you. And until then, you're happy to see much of anything. And speaking of anything, we were watching yet another one of Tom's new favorite pets. When I noticed some movement down by the creek bed, it was just about dark, but there was a young buck. This looked like a 6 or an 8 point working in a scrape. He came up to the feeder, stood there, got himself a couple of mouthfuls, and just looked around. This would be a great buck in just a couple of years. He was already high and had some mass for a young deer. But it would be a couple of years before he was in any real danger, at least from me. I did notice as he left he had a bit of a limp and he had a couple of wounds on his left front shoulder. Obviously, he was mature enough to at least think he could be a fighter. Although I didn't think it was working out too well for him. Well, that was a little bit older buck, and judging by those puncture wounds on his left front shoulder, there were still bigger, badder bucks roaming this area somewhere. We just hadn't got one in front of us yet. I was hopeful that was going to happen pretty quick. Maybe tomorrow would be the day because, friends, I got to tell you, leaving a hunt to the last minute, I really don't care to do that. Not if I can help it. And early the next morning, things were looking up. Not one, but two adult does were working their way across between the ponds and headed up in our direction. This is exactly what you want to see. Hopefully one of these gals had a buck dragging along behind her, and if they came past us, sooner or later that meant he probably would too. Unfortunately, they both passed by, didn't stop to feed, just kept on going, and we never did see a buck following either one of them. And then, about an hour after sunup, I noticed a couple of fawns followed by a doe working their way down along the fence. And following them was another young buck. This might have been the forked horn we'd seen the first evening, I couldn't be sure, but he picked her up and took her out into the field. I kept waiting for an older buck to come and push him off.
Buck starter again.
But none ever did. At least not while I could see.
Seeing some deer out here, just not the deer. Not yet.
Even in the wind we were seeing deer, we just weren't seeing the deer. And with half our time already over, I was beginning to wonder a little bit. It was fairly obvious the rut didn't have any of the older deer up on their feet, at least not in the daylight. And I was beginning to think, we may have pushed this till too late. We needed something to change, friends. We needed something to happen, and we needed it to happen pretty quick. And something did happen. The wind got a lot worse. So bad, in fact, I decided to take the crossbow out to the tree. I wasn't seeing anything to shoot at, but I did reason that if I had, I'd have a better chance getting a decent shot off with a crossbow than I would trying to hold a conventional bow upright in this much wind. And then, just as I was turning to look at Tom pointing at his new best friend, I noticed something that was coming across the field, and there was a buck. It looked like a pretty nice buck. And even more important, he was starting to circle and work his way in. This appeared to be a 3-year-old 7 or maybe 8 point. He even had a bit of a drop tine coming down off the base on his left antler. And more importantly, he was working his way right up in front of us, right up toward the feeder. He stopped at about 22, 23 yards, and I just sat there holding the crossbow on him, and then he turned as if he was going to walk away. And then he turned and came back again. He was obviously nervous, but I just waited. I knew that if he calmed down, I'd get my shot, and then broadside, head down, exactly what you hope for. And I decided to pass. This was a gorgeous buck. Certainly a shooter in a lot of places. I just felt that knowing the deer Ed has down here, we might see a whole lot better critter. I was thinking in the back of my mind, though, we only have a day left. Still, this buck in a year would be a monster. And for myself, I was willing to wait and give him that one more year. Tom, on the other hand, I don't think he thought it was a great idea. Yes, I was still getting that. You blew it. That was your chance. Look, from Tom the next morning when we got into the tree, our last day in Kansas. Friends, when you make a decision, when I make a decision as a hunter, part of that decision-making process has to be, you know, you got to live with it. I knew that was a decent buck. He just needed another year, in my opinion, and besides, we still had one more day. And as a hot red sunrise faded into the purple light and then full sunrise of that last morning, we saw one fawn. Now we were down to our last afternoon.
It's our last night on stand here, Tom's. Wind's blowing 35 mile an hour. Get some of that magic deer dust out of your pocket and start sprinkling it. We're running out of time.
Yep, we got about 3 or 4 hours, and that's gonna be it.
If you know any tricks, then don't save them. Now's the time.
Putting up a tree or hunting?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, putting up a Christmas tree or getting a deer would be interesting. See what I put up with? You see? You think this job's easy.
Well, once I assured Tom we could stop by the Christmas store on the way home, we started hunting. But all we saw that last evening was a quail. That is until the last few minutes when I noticed a doe working her way up past us and then another. And when the second doe looked back, there. That was the kind of buck we'd been waiting all week to see. Now he had to get in here. We had just minutes of legal shooting light left. It was literally gonna be a race against the sun.
Bah.
I burped him to a stop, and he stopped short. He was totally obstructed. There wasn't anything I could do. I just have to wait and hope he wouldn't take off. And then he finally stepped forward.
Bah.
Nailed him. Pounded him, dude, right here. That's right there. Boy, that. Could you see it? Were you on him or no?
Yep, we're on him.
Talk about your last second. Holy smokes. Big old buck, too. Big, heavy. I think he's only a 7-point, but it's a lot bigger than that one we saw. That's a 4 or 5-year-old buck, just a dandy. And it looked, to me, it looked really good. Thank you, Lord. Last second, we was gonna leave tonight in about 45 minutes. We may be an hour. You all right with that?
That'll work, that'll work.
Wow. Whew. I gotta sit down for a fall down. Thank you, Tom. Oh, and thank you, Ed Bart. Oh, man. Oh, my. You think an old man still get shook up? Yeah. Last second miracle. Happy Thanksgiving, eh? Wow. You wanna go find deer?
Let's go take a look.
Let's go find deer.
How about that? A giant buck in the last few minutes of the daylight? I've heard of doing things in the 11th hour. Well, that was more like a quarter till closing. Yeah, that was amazing, and a giant buck. All we needed to do now was go grab Ed and his grandson Grady and hopefully recover that last-minute miracle.
There's some.
All right, come on up, Grady. You're right here. Is that the last blood, Grady?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, stay right there.
What about that dead deer?
Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah,
I think that's it. This is right here. That one, I think, Ed. What do you think? Is that him? Look at that.
Yep.
Got that granddad. Gutted more deer than most people have ever seen, except for maybe Ed Bart. This would be a heck of a deer if Ed hadn't gone out and shot a 10-point the same night. Congratulations on that again. A nice buck. Just a, you know, he's only got 7 points, but he's got 6 inches of mass, and Tom said by the time we got over here, He was sure it was going to weigh 150 pounds. I bet by the time we get back to the buggy, it'll weigh 400.
I bet it will too.
That is a beautiful
Yeah,
old
he
buck.
is.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, you bet.
I
Congratulations.
appreciate it. You know, we
Good
come
buck.
down here just for Thanksgiving every year, and every year we leave with something to be thankful for, and this year, no exception. Oh,
Yep.
congratulations on your 10-point.
Thank you.
It's been a good night of hunting, folks. We'll show you a little shot. Ed shot a great buck too. It has been a night. We were gonna pack up and leave, but I think now we're gonna have to wait till morning, boss. Got a little work to do.
Yep, that's okay.
Yeah?
It's worth it.
It is. That's a beautiful
It's
old
worth
buck,
it.
just what we were looking for. We passed that 3-year-old 7-point yesterday, and I told Ed if he just had one more year, well, then he showed up with one more year on it. That is a beautiful, beautiful deer. I
Yep.
thank you again.
You bet.
We're gonna get him out of here and go find some supper.
Yep,
But
yep.
I tell you what, hey Grady,
Yes,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Buddy, it's truly a team effort. Oh, that is a dandy. Look at that thing.
Yep.
Friends, that is a last-minute miracle. A super buck in the very last few minutes, and I want you to know it really is a team effort. In order to do what we do as often as we do it, you need a great outfitter that can put you in a good spot that has mature deer. You have to have a great cameraman that's willing to pay attention to detail and movement and super scent control just to get near one of them big old boys, and then you have to make the shot and recover the animal. You know, in all the years of doing this, I'm still amazed we get it done as often as we do. Hey, I want to thank again Ed and Wendy Barton, certainly Grady, Uncle Jerry, everybody down at B&C Kansas for a great hunt. I truly want to thank my camera guy and friend Tom Dewey for all his effort and for the help on the trail. Folks, if you're going to go out and chase mature whitetails and hope to be successful more often than not, I truly suggest you take your A-team because you're going to need them. Hey, and if we do see you out there dragging in a big old Kansas buck of your own, well, you know we're going to stop and help, share a cup and a fire, maybe a few deer stories. And if we don't see you out there, friends, well, then I'll be waiting for you right back here so we can share another adventure from my Wilderness Journal.